Krishna So, continuing Srila Prabhupada's Lilamrita, in every town and village, around the world, from 1968 to 1971. That's when his movement really took off. Before that, it was very small, just, what you call it, 22nd Avenue, and then San Francisco. But, and some of the devotees who were there that time, they said, we thought this was it. This is as big as it's going to get. We had two temples, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. But Prabhupada had much bigger plans. He said, no, I want temples all around the world. So, where were we now? Oh yes. So, here he is in London, and this section is called London, a Dream Fulfilled. Srila Prabhupada rose early, about 1 a.m. in the morning. Naturally, everybody else is asleep. And he began dictating his latest book called Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna book had begun in Los Angeles 8 months earlier. He had actually started translating. It was a summary of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, which he started in 1959 with the first canto. Prabhupada began translating Srimad Bhagavatam in 1959. That's before he came west. And he had completed the first canto. He began, I think, in Vrindavan. He had a little room there at Radha Damodar temple. And when you look out, he had a little window, you look out, you could see Rupa Goswami's Samadhi. He said, this is the most sacred place in the world. And then he moved to Delhi, and he went to a little temple in Old Delhi. There's Old Delhi and New Delhi. Old Delhi is predominantly Muslim. In fact, the biggest mosque in India is located there. And Prabhupada was just like a couple of blocks away. This place was called, what's the name of that place? Can't remember. I went there a couple of times. But he stayed there and finished the first canto. And once he was finished with the first canto, he said, now I'm ready to go. And that's all he had nothing else. And the rest is history. He had to go and beg for free passage. So, Prabhupada had been translating the first canto with successive verse and giving a Roman transliteration and Sanskrit to English synonyms, word for word. The English translation, after the English translation to the synonym, he then gave his commentary. And this this is a standard that he continued throughout. It was very much appreciated by the scholars in the West. They could see how he's not straying from the text. He's not even, by giving the word for word, they could see that he's drawing out from the text and commenting on it. The Krishna book, however, was all in English. This is the first. It was all in English with translation and commentary blended together as a transcendental story. It's like a storybook. This was very special. In his verse-by-verse translations of the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada was at that time still working on the 3rd canto. So in order to reach the 10th canto, it would take many years. But he was uncertain of how long he would live. And the thought of passing away without giving the world an authorized, readable account of the 10th canto, which is all Krishna's pastimes. This was the climax of the Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto. And it was the richest nectar of transcendental literature. Now, Prabhupada had enough manuscript pages to print a first volume, complete with many color illustrations, which he had commissioned his artists to paint. And to print such a book would be expensive, and Prabhupada had no money. He just had a desire to give a Krishna book with nice paintings and, but no money. Still, he depended fully on Krishna, and he translated it quickly in the quiet of the early mornings. At 4:30, Prabhupada's secretary at that time was a devotee named Purushottam. He entered Prabhupada's room, followed by Jamuna Dasi. Purushottam offered an artik to Prabhupada's small Radha Krishna deities, while Jamuna watched him, eager to learn how to do it. Prabhupada sang some prayers and accompanied himself on the harmonium. This was Mangalarti. What a treat to see Prabhupada singing, playing harmonium. And there's not many people, it's just his servant Purushottam and Jamuna. During Prabhupada's Mangalartik ceremony, the other dozen or so disciples assembled for their own Mangalartik in the temple. As they walked the damp pathway to the temple, they're still at John Lennon's house. As they walked there, they could feel the cold air and heard the bell ringing and Prabhupada singing. They could see through the pre-dawn mist that the light was coming from Prabhupada's window on the 2nd floor. And the building looked like a lantern in the dark. The sound of his harmonium drifted mystically through the trees. Later that morning, some of the devotees brought Prabhupada several new articles about his arrival in London, from the newspapers. There's one newspaper called the Daily Sketch. Its headlines were, "Enter His Divine Grace, Abhay Charan Bhaktivedanta Swami." This carried a foot-high, photo of Srila Prabhupada playing kartals. And then there was The Sun, another newspaper. They wrote a story and the headline was, "Happiness is Hare Krishna's." And this also had a photo of Prabhupada along with the devotees. And then the Daily Mirror, another newspaper, showed Saraswati, that is Shamsundar and Malati's daughter. She was small. Then the Daily Telegraph, that's another newspaper. This carried a different kind of article. The headline was, "Hindu Temple Protests. Conversion of office premises in Bloomsbury into a Hindu temple is being investigated by the Ministry of Public Buildings and Works." This is how the article began. The devotees' neighbors at Bury Place had apparently gone and complained about the renovation work that was being done for the past 2 weeks. The article quoted a Camden council member, I guess Camden is the area, saying, if their planning application is not granted, it will cost them a lot of money. Prabhupada said the devotees should do everything they could to prevent any delays or obstacles to their establishing the temple and installing the deities of Radha and Krishna. He really wanted this to happen. He suggested they should go daily into the city and work carefully and persistently with the officials and secure the authorization required. Meanwhile, Shamsundar should just continue doing his remodeling work at the building, Bury Place. For Prabhupada, such diplomatic and legal strategy, he considered that as spiritual as translating Krishna book or singing before his deities. Dealing with the city officials. Something you have to do. He was serious, heavy, and his disciples could sense this as he looked at them with full concentration. His intelligent gaze was penetrating. He wanted to see if they understood his directions. This heaviness of the Guru was an essential part of their relationship with him. They were young men, inexperienced, and he was sending them on a mature assignment that required both transcendental and worldly expertise to deal with the city officials. Serving as Prabhupada's menial messengers and workers, his disciples imbibed his gravity, and they also became heavy. They too became dedicated servants of their Guru. And to bungle an important order because of naivety, you know this word, naivety, or carelessness, this would be a spiritual disqualification, they taught. Prabhupada had often told them that a Vaishnava is not a retired person who only eats and sleeps and chants Hare Krishna. He said, no, a Vaishnava fights for Krishna, just as Arjun did and Hanuman did. And so as the devotees try his best, working in full surrender, he said Krishna will support and protect him. Dawn, early morning arrived, and it was time for Prabhupada's morning walk. The cold September night shrouded the morning in a heavy fog. Some of the low-lying grounds were waterlogged at this time of year, and even in the higher plots, the long grass would remain wet until mid-morning. Prabhupada admitted, this climate is not at all suitable for me, London. But having heard of the beauty of the grounds, he insisted on taking his usual morning walk. There were several acres of land to walk. This building where they're staying was called Tittenhurst. It dated back to the 1700s, 1770 to be exact, when the estate had been renowned for its many varieties of trees and shrubs. It was one of the most unusual collections of trees in England. Special place. Even now, there were cypress trees, weeping beech, another tree, Austin poplars, royal palms, redwoods, varieties of pine trees, monkey puzzle trees, and orchards of cherry and apple trees gracing the stately grounds. One cypress tree stood more than 125 feet tall. Bushes and vines grew in dense thickets. Close by the main house were hundreds of rhododendrons. That's a plant, big flowers. There was a formal rose garden and several fountains. The estate even had its own lake, stocked with goldfish and perch. And at the far end of the property stood a row of greenhouses for growing grapes and peaches. It was designed to be abloom in every season. The grounds had been carefully kept for generations. A recent owner, having employed more than 20 gardeners to maintain that property. 20 gardeners. But John Lennon was the present owner at the time. He, however, was deliberately allowing the grass to go uncut. Couldn't be bothered. Prabhupada walked out into the morning mist, onto the long, wet grass, dressed almost entirely in black. Have you seen pictures of this? Black coat, black hat, black Russian hat. It was a full-length overcoat given to him by the devotees in Germany. It covered his saffron robes and sweater, leaving only little glimpses of saffron cloth, because this coat went down to his ankles. As Prabhupada walked, accompanied by several of his disciples, he passed a fountain near the main house and entered a grove. The path narrowed with vines and bushes close together, and then it led them into an open meadow, which once was a well-tended lawn, but now it's just a field of high grass. Bulldozers had excavated an area which, according to rumors, would soon be a helicopter landing field. They could just leave from home. At the bottom of the sloping meadow, Prabhupada entered an orchard. Many leaves had fallen from the trees, and the sun's first rays now revealed shavings of autumn at Prabhupada's feet. He stood under one of the trees, and the diffused sunlight made the sky beyond the branches glow golden. He said to the devotees, "In my childhood, there were many names, so many, given to me. Krishna appeared, and there was a great celebration on that day. I was called Nandu because I was born on the day after Krishna appeared, after Janmashtami. And it's called, that day is known as Nandotsava. Nandotsava. They used to call Prabhupada Nandu, nickname. I was also called Govardhan. And one of my sisters used to call me Kacha. I've been called so many names. As children, we were all very beautiful. There were always so many names given to children. This was the culture. But all these names, they're all dead and gone. He turned and began to walk again, saying nothing more on the subject. Prabhupada mentioned that the British economy, he said, was sinking into the sea because of the devaluation of the pound. So many British lords had gained their wealth by exploiting other nations. Now, having exhausted their good karma, they were suffering the results of their sins. They were too poor to maintain these great estates, like Tiddenhurst. They used to have 17 men working full-time just in the garden. And now they cannot even pay the taxes. So they have to give the whole thing up. And it is falling, these estates are falling into the hands of Sudras. Ishan, my friends, Ishan, one of Prabhupada's devotees, he asked Prabhupada, how is it that a person like me, coming from such a degraded background, can come to Krishna consciousness? Prabhupada says, because you are intelligent. What is that verse? No. We learned. Yes.
Okay.
Krishna Varnam, Krishna Krishna, Samokam Vestra Parshanam, Jagai Sankirtana Praye Yajanti Sumedasa. This word, Sumedasa, says people who are intelligent, they will get to the Sankirtan. So this was his reply. He said, because you are intelligent, you can come to Krishna consciousness, even though your background is degraded. Ishan said, I don't understand. Prabhupada repeated, because you are intelligent. Ishan's wife, Vibhavati, she asked, what is the meaning of spiritual master? Prabhupada then replied, actually, I am not your spiritual master. That title is simply a formality. You should think of me as your spiritual father, not master. You should think of me as your spiritual father, or your eternal father. As they continued walking past a tractor, Kula Shekhar, he was one of the first English devotees to join, first Englishman to join Kula Shekhar. He remarked, he said, Prabhupada, this tractor is a wonderful invention, isn't it? Prabhupada turned to Kula Shekhar and he said, no, this tractor is the downfall of the Indian village system. People used to till the land with the oxen, everywhere. But then when the Westerners would bring tractors, so many men were out of work. And Prabhupada said, it is the downfall of the Indian village system because it does the work of 10 men. Okay. Previously, the young men of the villages would be engaged in plowing the field. But then this tractor came along and did the work of all these young men. And so the men had nothing to do. So they all went to the cities to try and find work. And they all fell into illusion. Stopping beside a clump of yellow grass, Prabhupada asked, why is this yellow grass different? No one knew the answer. The other grass is green, but why is this grass yellow? What is the reason? Still nobody would answer. Then Prabhupada says, this yellow grass is drying up. Because the roots are not attached. Therefore it is yellow. Similarly, when we become detached, or when we detach ourselves from Krishna, then we will all dry up. How we drew the philosophy from grass. Then they walked to a spot where the green grass was growing almost 6 feet high. That's pretty tall. That's like as tall as you. Is that John? Stopping at a path that the tractor had cut through the grass, Prabhupada smiled and he says, oh, we can go through here. And he strode ahead of the devotees with his cane held high. He walked until he came to a low hill that had been cleared, and he stopped. And he stood there surrounded by a sea of grass and a few disciples. Then Kula Shekhar asked him about the song which he was singing earlier in the morning. Remember, these devotees don't know anything. Prabhupada replied, this song is about Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He would rise and go out at this time of morning when the sun has risen but is not yet visible in the sky. So it's still dark. As Prabhupada spoke, the mist was already dissipating and the golden glow in the sky had moved higher above the horizon. Prabhupada raised his hands and swayed from side to side dancing. He said, in this way. This is how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would dance in the morning. As they returned back to the main house, John Lennon was standing there, gazing out through his glass door, watching Prabhupada walking with a cane, dressed in his black overcoat and his Wellington, those are rubber boots, boots that come up to. Prabhupada looked like a gentleman of the estate out for his morning walk. Stopping now and then, he would look at certain trees, touching their bark, rubbing their leaves, inspecting them closely. At the beginning of the walk, a devotee had picked a rose and handed it to him. And he still held that rose in his hand with care. He walked for about an hour. Everywhere the scenery had been beautiful, and everywhere he instructed his followers in Krishna consciousness on his morning walk. This was something he continued throughout his time in the West. We'd go for a morning walk religiously every day. In Los Angeles, you would go either to the beach, Venice Beach, or he used to go to a park called, I can't remember. He preferred working on the beach, because the devotees were suggesting, oh, we could go here, we could go there. And that time, in the morning, I was taking his walk. And of course, every devotee wanted to go in the walk, but everybody couldn't. So the authorities, the temple president would select who could go. And that time, Prabhupada it was like informal. No, he wasn't sitting down in his vyasasana. He's walking briskly, but devotees could ask him questions about anything at that time. When he said, when they're having Bhagavatam class, he said the questions had to be on the topic, on the verse. But when they were walking, on the morning walk, they could ask anything that was on their mind. And he would answer them. So it was a time where he was giving more instruction. As Prabhupada approached the building where he was staying, he met little Saraswati. Taking her hand, he walked along with her to the front of the stairs, where he stopped. Prabhupada was halfway up the stairs when he saw Saraswati standing in the doorway watching him. She stopped. He looked and beckoned to her. Come on. So she crawled up the stairs after him. She was so small that she couldn't walk up. When Saraswati came into Prabhupada's room, he would ask her, "So, are you old enough to go to Gurukul?" And she said, "No," shaking her head. "Come here," he would say. "I'm going to put a stamp on your forehead. And then we are going to put you in a red mailbox and send you off to Gurukul." I was joking with her. Saraswati began to cry. "Malati, Malati," that's the mother, "I don't want to go." And she ran and hid behind Malati. "Come on, Saraswati," Prabhupada coaxed. "Come and sit on my lap, and I'll give you some prasadam." She came out and sat on Prabhupada's knee. He said, "Okay, now get me the stamp." He was teasing her. Saraswati shrieked when he said that, jumped off his knee and ran back to her mother. To Srila Prabhupada, Saraswati was a pure spirit soul. But because she was in a small child's body, he didn't teach her philosophy. But he teased her, and he gave her prasadam, and he treated her with the affection of a grandfather. But through her attachment to him, she would become attached to Krishna. After breakfast, when the sun had warmed the air, Prabhupada opened his windows and sat down at his harmonium, and he began singing bhajans. As he sang with his eyes closed, his head shaking as he played the harmonium, Jamuna Devi, she sat at the bottom of the stairs crying tears of appreciation. Prabhupada had been singing for a while when he stopped and called for Jamuna. He asked, "Do you enjoy my kirtan?" "Yes," she nodded, "very much." He said, "The prayers of Narottam Das Thakur is above the material platform. It is directly from the spiritual platform, and there is no need of even understanding the language. It's a pure vibration. It is just like a thunderburst. Everyone can hear the sound of thunder, and there's no misunderstanding. Similarly, these songs by Narottam Das Thakur and others, they are above the material platform, and they crack within your heart like thunder. Why don't you come up here every day during my chanting?" She said, "That would be wonderful, Prabhupada." "Yes, and from now on we will record it. And every morning after that, Prabhupada would sing, Purushottam and Yamuna would come to his room and record his singing." Then Yamuna asked him, "What is your favorite bhajan, Prabhupada?" Prabhupada returned. Instead of answering her, telling her what his favorite bhajan is, he asked her, "What is yours?" And she said, Lord Chaitanya's Shikshastakam. We recite every morning here. And Prabhupada says, well, my favorite is Hari Hari Dipale. This is where it came from. Hari Hari Dipale. And he gave a gist of the meaning of the prayer in English. It's written in Bengali, but so he tells them what it means in a short form. He said, O Lord Hari, I have spent my life uselessly. Although I have taken this rare human birth, I have not worshipped Radha and Krishna, and so I have knowingly drunk poison. He said, there is so much depth of meaning in Narottam Das Thakur's prayers. Purushottam said, that's the other disciple. One time, Prabhupada was sitting alone in his room, and I walked by and I heard him singing a prayer. He was singing something I had never heard before. So I went on, because I don't know what he's singing. Of course, everyone knows that he sings. He can sing very beautifully, very greatly inspired. But I had never heard him sing as beautiful as this time. I heard him sing many, many times, in many temples, but I'd never heard him sing as beautiful as this. I felt very honored to hear it, very privileged. It was beautiful. When he was finished, he just got up and he said, let's go now. Prabhupada also chanted one chapter of Bhagavad Gita daily for 18 days. There's 18 chapters, so each day he did one chapter. He says, anywhere that Bhagavad Gita is chanted, that place becomes a tirtha, a holy place. Purushottam reported to the devotees in the United States about the activities of Srila Prabhupada. This way they can know, they can keep up to date. So Purushottam wrote, he, Prabhupada, is singing prayers a lot. Much of it is being recorded. I must admit that the tapes of songs and prayers he's making now are the best ones I have ever heard. Just wait until you hear them when we get back. As the Bhagavatam says, drink deep this nectar, O man of piety, and you shall be taken from this mortal frame. Translation of the verse. The women were cooking for Prabhupada and serving him American desserts. Oh, sounds familiar. They were serving him desserts like apple pies, donuts, glazed cookies. Prabhupada would smile when he saw them, but he would only nibble at his dessert. One afternoon he said to them, these sweets are very nice, but no one has made me any sandesh. He wants what Krishna likes. Although they had watched carefully, watched him make it, their first attempts produced sandesh that was as dry and grainy. Like Bamsi. but Prabhupada accepted it nonetheless, preferring the sandish which Krishna himself used to eat. He preferred this to the Western confections. For the devotees at Tittenhurst to have Prabhupada living amongst them was again to witness Krishna's pure devotee as he engaged constantly in ecstatic devotional work with his body, mind, and words. They could see how Prabhupada was speaking and acting in Krishna consciousness at every moment, and his presence confirmed that the most exalted platform of pure devotional service was a reality. His disciples felt bliss and renewed determination just being with him. Prabhupada's hosts, John Lennon and Yoko Ono, they also had valuable opportunities to be near Prabhupada, yet they chose to keep apart. They just didn't know how valuable it was to have his association. Remaining instead together in their own world, they only mingled rarely with the devotees. Prabhupada's men continued to work under John's managers, and John Lennon was content to let the Swami and his entourage stay there. He didn't mind them being there. When the head gardener came by and asked John how should he treat the devotees, John Lennon said, "Let them please themselves." On hearing of certain activities in the main house, Prabhupada commented about the bad influence women sometimes have on men. But he kept out of John and Yoko's affairs. He didn't gossip. He had his own affairs in Krishna consciousness. Read one more little paragraph. Having been whisked from the airport to Tittenhurst, that's the mansion, Prabhupada had seen very little of London. And one day he asked Shama Sundar to take him on a tour of the city. You see, Prabhupada had grown up in British-owned Calcutta. They were occupying India. And hearing of London being praised as the seat of Britain's world empire, he heard these things. So when he saw how small many of London's historic landmarks were, he was particularly surprised. At the Buckingham Palace, he remarked, "We have many houses in Calcutta much bigger than this." Bigger than Buckingham Palace. The Thames, which is the river, celebrated in the writings of many British authors. Prabhupada had studied about these authors in college. And he was disappointed also. He says, "This is just a canal." The river Thames. This is just a canal. In my mind, I thought it was bigger than the Ganges. But it was smaller. But the most interesting sight of all to Prabhupada was the building at 7 Bury Place. That's where the temple is going to be, First Temple. The city officials had granted the devotees permission to occupy the temple. That part of the battle was won. Now, Shyam Sundar and his few helpers had to finish the remodeling of the temple.
On seeing the temple's location, which was near the British Museum and Madame Tussauds Wax Museum, it's a famous place, Srila Prabhupada became even more anxious that Shamasundar should fix an opening date as soon as possible, because it's in a great neighborhood. Prabhupada wrote to Satsuru Maharaj about his stay at Tittenhurst Park. He said, "There is a nice big hall exactly suitable for a temple. I have begun to give lectures here on specific days, but no outsiders are coming. They're not allowed to come on Chandana's estate." Prabhupada wanted to preach to the outsiders, and if they wouldn't come to him, he would go to them. His first outside meeting was arranged by the devotees at Camden Town Hall, which is in the heart of London, and it was well attended both by Britishers and by Indians. Many Indians live in London. After Prabhupada's brief lecture, which was only about 15 minutes, there was a lively question and answer session. One woman said, "Would you say Krishna is God or Krishna is love?" Prabhupada replied, "Without love, how can Krishna be God?" The woman said, "No, I asked you." Prabhupada said, "Yes, that is the real position. Krishna means all attractive, and anything which is all attractive, you generally love." Then a man asked, "Then the particle of the Supreme Being, man, is also all love?" Prabhupada said, "Yes, you are part and parcel of Krishna. You want to love somebody, and Krishna wants to love you. This is loving exchange. But instead of loving Krishna, you are trying to love something else, and that is your trouble. The love is there within you and in Krishna. And when the love will be exchanged between you and Krishna, that will be your perfection of life." The man said, "Thank you very much." Then an Indian woman asked, "Would it matter if I worship any other? Would it matter whether I worship Krishna or Shiva or Christ or Buddha? Would it matter?" Prabhupada said, "If you worship Shiva, you will get to Shiva. If you worship Krishna, you will get to Krishna. Why do you expect to get Krishna by worshipping Shiva? What is your idea?" The Indian woman said, "My idea is, would it matter?" Prabhupada, "Don't you suppose if you purchase a ticket for India, you will go to India? How can you expect to go to America?" The Indian woman says, "This is not the point I'm trying to get." Prabhupada said, "This is the point." This is explained in Bhagavad Gita. Yanti deva vrata devan pitrin yanti pitri vrataha. You worship Krishna, you come to Krishna. You worship the demigods, you go there. Indian woman continues arguing. But my point is, Prabhupada said, "Your point, why don't you understand? Understand the description of Bhagavad Gita. If you worship demigods like Shiva and others, you will go there. But if you worship Krishna, you will go to Krishna. What is the difficulty to understand this?" The Indian woman asked. so do you think that Shiva is a demigod? Prabhupada said, yes. Why not? Indian woman. But Krishna says it doesn't matter the way you worship. She's been reading some other Gita, some other Bhagavad Gita where things are not clear. She said, all means have the same goal. So what is such? And you will reach the same goal. You can take any different path, but you will come to me eventually. This is, she got this from some other Gita. Prabhupada said, look, try to understand. Suppose you have to go to the 42nd floor of a building and you are going up one after another. So the goal is to reach the 42nd story. But you cannot claim that after going a few steps that I have come to the goal. The path is one. That's all right. But you have to reach the ultimate goal. You do not know what is the ultimate goal. You simply say that all paths reach to this goal. But you do not know what is the ultimate goal. Then a young hippie stood up and shouted, "Hey, Swamiji!" People in the audience all turn around. See, who's that? The hippie. He said, "You said if we're not careful in the next life, we'll become a dog. But I want to tell you, I don't mind if I become a dog in my next life." It's a hippie. Prabhupada said, "You have my blessings." You want to become a dog. And the young man sat down. It's really, truly amazing how Prabhupada had to deal with all these half-baked philosophies. You know? Actually, even when he was, sometimes you could see him, he's wrestling himself down from where he is. He's absorbed in Krishna Lila. And he had to wrestle himself down to come down to talk to us. Because we were so far from there. But to speak with someone saying, "I want to become a dog." He met every conceivable argument. And he was ready to deal with all of them. And this was the first time for him. Coming from India. Of course, there were people in India who also had weird questions. After all, India is known as the land of gurus, but there are also bogus gurus, speaking nonsense, not according to the scripture. Rupa Goswami, Prabhupada, he says, Shruti, Smriti, Puranadi, Pancharatriki, Vidimpina, Aikantiki Hare Bhakti, Utpataya Iva Kalpate. See, any so-called spiritual practice or knowledge that is not in harmony according to Shruti, means like Upanishads, Smriti, in the Puranas, Shruti, Smriti, Purana, Pancharatriki, like Narada's Muni, Narada Pancharatra, he gave scriptures too. If it's not in accordance with that, it is utpataya. It's a disturbance only. It's a disturbance in society. And a lot of that was going on in India and is going on. So coming to the West, he had dealt with much more complex misunderstandings. In the West, they didn't know much. So he was quite capable of dealing with them. There you go.
How to deal with these people who want spiritual life but don't want smriti, shruti and punctuality?
How to deal with them.
Yeah.
Give them prasadam
Good.
and get them to chant Hare Krishna. Prabhupada, in the early days, devotees told me that Prabhupada would say, if we go to lecture anywhere, and we used to go into colleges, we used to get, devotees would go and would approach a college, even high schools, and younger people, and ask if we can come and give a talk. And we got many engagements like that, coming to speak to American children in school. And Prabhupada said, begin with a kirtan, that will purify them. Then you speak, and then end with another kirtan. Bring some prasadam if you can. So we used to do many programs like that. Because the devotees were a novelty, it was a new thing. So they go to the school and they meet a professor, he'd be happy. Yes, come and speak to my class. So we were doing that. And we used to think we're planting seeds. These kids, when they grow up, some of them will become devotees. Okay, we should stop there. It's 9 o'clock. Right on time.